Hello and welcome to the second installment of our live conversation series with African film professionals on Cinidb Africa. My name is Jacqueline Encia and I am the project manager of the platform. Together with my wonderful team, we curate and update the information on a regular basis. Cinidb in its finished form will be a multilingual networking and information platform for film professionals in and of Africa. The platform will host information on everything African film related, such as a film professional directory, information about film festivals and markets. Currently, we have over 500 professionals registered, and we encourage you to register as well. This conversation series is part of the Cinidb aim to promote exchange between film professionals. We will keep you informed about the upcoming ones, so please do follow us on social media, such as Facebook and Twitter. You will also find the link underneath this video. In today's conversation, filmmaker Hawa Essuman talks to curator and archivist June Givanni about the importance of documenting history by looking at her over 30 years career as a curator and collector, and by looking at the June Givanni Pan-African Cinema Archive. Enjoy the conversation and remember to post your questions in the chat below for the Q&A session afterwards. Thank you very much.
Hello. As Jacqueline generously said, my name is Hawa Essuman and I am very pleased to be speaking with June Givanni. Hi, June.
Hi, Hawa. Hi, everybody. Hi. And I'm very pleased to be especially following the very distinguished conversation that I witnessed with Hajuj, Lust, and our sister from Zimbabwe on the first one.
Yeah.
What standards to follow?
I could curating and programming for over 30 years of Pan-African cinema, and the fact that you're the founder of one of the founders of the Black Film Bulletin. I want to know how you came to begin the archive. What made you begin?
Okay. Well, the thing is, as a curator and as a programmer, somebody working with festivals since the early 1980s, I was working in the pre-digital era very much. And so everything that we did, everything that we used, and how people interconnected, how you connected with filmmakers, how you connected with people working in the industry was very much analog, and it was very much physical. So that people would literally give you tapes. Very often VHS was at least the currency, even for material that is made on celluloid. So it was the era of 16 and 35 mil, of 8mm and other things, but it was also the era of video, analog video. And so people were able to give you those if you needed them to prepare for curating. And it was a way of keeping, and because I worked with many different festivals in different territories, it didn't make sense to physically find a filmmaker and give them back the tape. And in fact, they wanted you to keep it because you were promoting their work and what they do. Again, pre-digital, so we didn't have social media, but it was a way of having this role between the filmmaker and the industry. And so, you collected a lot of materials and physically, paper materials, promotional materials, posters, festival catalogues, publicity materials for films. All of that was part of it.
So did you know then that you were going to turn what you have into an archive? Because you knew that this was what you were going to be doing, and people to this day still give you their work. So did you know back then that it would turn into this?
No, at that time it wasn't an intentional endeavor. It was actually, what I was doing was collecting a resource to aid programming and curating. It didn't make sense to not do this, because you are continually looking and trying to put into context the work that you're showing. And of course, you would know as a curator as well. That's a lot of what we do. And to be able to do that, you need the information about the filmmakers, the information about the industry of the national cinemas, the connections that are taking place. And so at that time, it was a curatorial resource. It's only after many years that you then realize that you have this large collection that you're then putting into storage. And so it becomes, it's something that it shouldn't only be my curatorial resource. It should be a curatorial resource and information for all sorts of people who work in the industry, or even beyond the industry, in the cultural sector, community sector.
So is this why you started?
Well, partly because I couldn't afford to keep it in storage anymore. It was quite a big curatorial resource, and also it made sense that it is seen and exposed to and used by others who work in the industry, but others who have an interest in its cultural richness, in that aspect of its dimension, in its educational. Filmmakers who want to look at the work of other filmmakers in the past, filmmakers who want to use some of that. It's limited. It was limited, and it still is limited to an extent, because having been given the materials in that sort of time, in that sort of context, I don't own the rights to the materials. So each time anything is being requested beyond actually letting people look at it at the archive, or showing it in a show, because I do a number of presentations, because it's physical material, Beyond that, I still have to reference back to the owners, the filmmakers, and so. But it's a resource that has to be made available and needs to be seen, and that's what I tried to do with the archive, and that's why I took it out of storage and took it to. In fact, I found some space at a community centre in Brixton, which is where I started cataloguing and sifting it, and doing screenings for them by way of a negotiated return for them for the space.
Yeah. So does it still live there? Because my next question was, where does it live? How do you?
It was there, and we did a lot of things there. We used to run workshops, especially for the little ones, with flip books to show them animation and get people in to do digital animation as well. We did screenings on open days, and we actually ran a little project where some of the older young people were invited to, because people would always put their heads around the door and say, what's in here? What is this room? They give me this big room, which was like it had no windows, and it was this some sort of storage room, but it was big enough to use it as a space to work in and to store some of the materials. And people weren't sure what an archive was. So I ran a project where some of the young people were invited to make a little video about what it means to be a young person in 2012 in Brixton, that will then go into a time capsule and be opened, sort of in the next millennia or something.
Yeah.
So they got a sense of talking about themselves on video and so things like that. And then there was a lot wider interest. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's
so then
there, but then
so
obviously
some of it is there.
No, it's no longer there. We moved to that situation couldn't continue when there were structural changes to the center. And in 2016, because I was there from 2011, I think, so I had that space for 5 years. But in 2016, we managed to. We were very lucky to get a space at the Mayday Rooms, which is itself an archive based in the center of town in Fleet Street. And they're a very, very progressive archive. They have had a great space. And I've been within that building, the Mayday Rooms building, since 2016. And that's where the archive is now. Plus, a lot of it is still here. I still have a room at my house, which has a lot of the archive as well.
Because my question was going to be the question of space, because an archive is a growing, living thing.
Yes.
What are you going to do about space? And does that then mean that you have to be very careful about what you add to it because you have a finite amount of space?
Yes. All of that. I do have to be very careful about.
Well, how do you pick?
And I'm not, of course, I'm still curating. B, I'm still particularly interested in what is, what is happening and what is coming now. And of course, an archive is a living archive, is continually interacting with the contemporary. That's what makes the archive relevant, and it's what makes the contemporary relevant to be interacting. So that necessarily means that you are sometimes taking new materials in. And when you are still working with festivals and still working with filmmakers whose work you find absolutely stunning, you're continually looking as well for that link. And I'm very interested in young people that are inspired by the archive, and they are also coming there to look for links and to look for information about what happened, what went before them, or filmmakers they might have heard of, and also how they can take some inspiration from that. So it is a living archive in that sense, and I try to be very selective for moving forward. But it's very different now because, of course, we're in a digital age, and it's possible to do that without too much physical space, although there's some still needed. But the digital space is also something that you still have to think about, because
because storage isn't free wherever it is. Yeah,
exactly. So but it is necessary to have that interconnection and that interaction between what's from the previous era and what is happening now. Definitely, and it's something that you continually have to shift. The archive is still being catalogued. It's a lot of stuff, and because you have to actually catalogue each item. It's still at the moment it's still listing, not as deeply described as it should be. It's being done in stages.
Because so my question then becomes, the question of resources. You still need to put everything, to catalog everything. You still need to make sure that everything is safe and housed and nothing rots or gets fungus or doesn't die because what do you call it? Atrophying, because you've got paper, you've got film, that all of that needs care. And that is actually in itself, forget all the other stuff, is a 24-hour job.
Yes.
What resources do you need? Do you have, do you need, do you want, ideally, to keep this going?
These are the resources I have. Yes, definitely. And both restoration and actually maintaining material in a good and operating way is really, really important. And it's becoming more and more difficult because even the VHS to DVD operating systems are now becoming so difficult, and so some of them are becoming obsolete, which is going to mean a big problem for an archive like this, which has a lot of VHS tapes, not only VHS, but mainly it's tapes for that material. But of course, the archive's value is in also a lot of the contextual material that it has, because it has a lot of that as well. We didn't go through all the different items, but there are some very valuable items in terms of what it represents and how it might be used within the archive. But it is a big, and we don't have, because we don't have a regular funding situation. Nobody is full-time except me. And we don't have, and everybody is voluntary. And unless we get a small amount, for instance, for the recent webinars, we had a small projects grant from the Art Fund. So it's project work that allows us to do things. Really, apart from that, the actual management and the running of the archive is totally voluntary. And we are supported in a sense by, we're helped anyway by the Mayday Rooms, who we pay a peppercorn rent.
Well, we're very grateful to them, but we need more. Because I mean, just speaking very selfishly, it's important to me that my stories and the stories that came before me live. Because the big problem that we're having, the big concern is, well, what are our stories? What were they? How did we look at them? How did we tell them? And film, while it's still very young, is the most tangible one that we've got, that documents from how we looked at each other, how we dressed, our hair, our conversation, all of that. And also how we designed our posters,
Yes.
I feel like we need to do like a crowdfunding. Something crowdfunding, kickstarting, like lottery supported something needs to happen.
We did have a GoFundMe campaign in 2017, soon after we moved year after we moved to Mayday Rooms, just so that we could raise some money to do a few small things. But I mean, that's your crowdfunding in an area that doesn't, where people are not themselves very well off, and you are looking to individuals mainly. What it needs is more strategic funding, either government or institutions that have that are interested in supporting such initiatives, and that should be interested in supporting such initiatives. So that is where some more significant support can come from. But also, we've worked over the years with the academic sector, with universities. So we've had, and with colleagues within our first major exhibition was with Sonia Boyce, our co-curated, myself with Sonia Boyce, the very distinguished artist, and Paul Goodwin, those two professors who were at Chelsea College of Art. And they had come, Sonia used to come to see the archive when it was at the community centre. So when people got to know about it, they used to come there to see it from academia. But our first major exhibition in 2014 was with their help and support. And we've kept relationships with them, with also with Birkbeck. Emma Sandon, one of our advisors at Birkbeck, has been a long time supporter. And these are supporters because they believe that as well that they should be supported and there should be funding and these things. And so it has its supporters. Unfortunately, institutions that have the money haven't been able to responded as we had hoped when we've approached them. So we're still hoping for that, and we're still hoping that it might be possible to have partnerships with some of the institutions that have the finance and that can support not just finance but resources of space, of expertise, of digitization, that sort of thing. So we are looking at what some of those partnerships might yield going forward. So
see, as you say that, and okay, so I'm trying to serve the archive and myself with the suggestion I'm about to make, which is that it should travel, because it physically lives in the UK.
Yeah.
And it's because you're in the UK. But I want it to be on the continent. And I'm sure that anyone else who has even a remote interest, as I do, wants it where they are. So maybe the solution is for it to travel and to have, I don't know, a 2 or 3 month stint in a capital city that is then hosted by an institution, and then travel on. That way we can see it, because in as much as digital is part of the solution, it is not the entire solution. I want to see and touch. I want to see. I want to experience firsthand what this is, what that film is, what that poster was, what all those things. Oh, there's so much documentation around this that is too much to, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little bit excited, but it's just too much to try and encapsulate into an online experience. Yes. It's insufficient.
I agree. And that is why we do exhibitions. We do physical exhibitions. It's true that a lot of them have taken place in the UK. We did the Pan-African Congress exhibition with Autograph in 2015, I believe. Yeah, that was when it was 70 years since the first Pan-African Congress was held in the UK. And so we did a Pan-African Film Lounge. But then we also took that to the Rotterdam Film Festival as part of Tessa Borman's, the sort of the Pan-African event that she had organized at Rotterdam. And so it was shown there. It's shown in museums, and so here in the UK. And we've also shown it at, where else? There was another place, another museum in Rotterdam. in the Netherlands, but also we came to, we did a special installation for the FESPACO, another 50th anniversary. We did another installation there, and there we were presenting at least 5 of the films we have in the archive that were made about FESPACO by different filmmakers and different people. So we do try and take it to different spaces, but I think it would be a great opportunity and a great idea to take it in some form. It couldn't be the whole archive because it's just too big, but it might be possible to do that, and to it would be maybe curated aspects of the archive to go to different. Definitely, I would love that. And of course, you have to remember this is a Pan-African cinema archive, and the term Pan-African is not just in relation to across the continent. It's the African continent and it's the African diaspora. So there's a big Black British collection within it. There's a Caribbean collection within it. There is an African American collection in it. And throughout that as well, there are other smaller collections within it, such as Latin America. And so, it's possible to do that either by geographically or even looking at the specific materials. But it would need, I think it would be best as some sort of large curated presence that could travel. And I think that would definitely be a good idea. But we'd have to be very careful, because the thing is, with physical materials, there's degeneration. And when you are, so first thing needs to happen is it needs to be digitized so that we can keep it. But definitely it also needs to travel physically as much as possible. You see, the thing is, 16 and 35 millimeter, a big problem for African cinema in the early days was that people couldn't afford many prints. You know how many films that existed and no longer exist anywhere? And one of the things that came up in the webinar series that we were running is that a lot of films were in European labs, and the filmmaker who was not able at that time to pay to get them back out of the labs then lost them, because the labs would go out of business. It would go to another lab, and things have got, this history has been lost. A lot of it is still being searched for. So when things are physical, you have to be aware that of how long they can be presented in that way. And very often, if it's the only copy that filmmakers had, for instance, of 16 and 35 mil, it would be shown until it exists no more physically, which was also quite sad. But yeah,
I know that one of the things. Yeah. Please finish.
No, I think a tour, or at least for the archive to travel, is definitely something that I think would be a good thing to do. I think it would work, and I would like, definitely, having been talking and looking at restitution of African art, the fact that it has to be has to be available and accessible by people on the continent where it was made, and who can also. I must say though, I don't think that everything in our archive is, a lot of material is not, I know, exclusive. It's not exclusive material. That means it might exist. They might exist in different places within, on the African continent. They haven't been brought together in this particular way, but they do exist. It's not exclusive material. But some people do find it interesting to make the cross connection and to compare. If you look at the stuff we have, posters from Haiti or from Martinique and what was happening on the African continent. It's that connection that I think is very rich, and that creators and curators on the African continent should have access to as much as anywhere else.
Yeah, no, because we're looking at the body of work, and we're asking. I mean, the question that we are asking ourselves as filmmakers, programmers, curators, or just consumers of the work is, who are we and how do we see ourselves? Whether it's articulated as such or not, it's a question that's always in the room. And whether or not something is special or exclusive doesn't make it any less important. And the framing of all of that, which is why I'm so excited about this archive, is to see how that fits with all that's come before or came at the same time, so that you can look at it for yourself and make your own decision or have your own thought process around it.
Yes.
And that's the value of it.
Yes, that is very important, because that is what keeps an archive alive as well. Because you need to be able to, a younger generation or a subsequent generation has to look at it, and with what they bring to it from where they are in the contemporary can indicate its value or not, because they are going to be able to look at it and make different connections, see different things, pull out different dimensions to it. And that is part of what keeps it a living archive as well. Okay.
And the thing about that, and just to segue just a little bit, I know that you've had a conversation about restitution, the restitution in film and what that means. I really want us to discuss that, because that really also determines what you're allowed in the archive and what people own, because it's something that we take for granted. I think we just assume ownership, which is not true.
Yes. The webinars. Yes, carry on. You want to?
No, please go on.
Okay. The webinar series was about restitution of African art, which is what Kwate's Ni Kwate's film was about. You Hide Me. I don't think we mentioned the name of the film. Anyway, You Hide Me.
Yes.
Which
is required viewing for everybody. Viewing for everybody.
And it's on the Vimeo platform at the moment. That film was in our archive, of course. And one of the things that we wanted to do was to join with organizations. We couldn't do this on our own. We didn't have any funding, and thought we would move forward with this. But luckily, towards the end, we did get a small projects grant from the Art Fund in the UK. But we turned to organizations who were doing work in this area of restitution, and Afford is one of them. It's the African Development Association for African Development, Afford in London, and another one was the Africa Centre, because the film You Hide Me was first launched there back in 1970 in the Africa Centre. And the third partner was SOAS, who I do have some University of London SOAS, who I have some connection with, and where the film was first publicly screened in 1971, organized by one of the alumna of SOAS, Samia Nkrumah, Nkrumah's daughter. And she had organized a screening of the film at SOAS back in 1971. Those were the three partners. And although the main issue around the film's main issue was around restitution of African art, looking at where we are now and what is being said and how people are working. What is the connection between African art and artifacts and the moving image, especially as a lot of artists are working across all of those mediums. You couldn't necessarily totally exclude the moving image. And that is an area that a number of people involved in the whole restitution movement and idea have been speaking about. And one of my colleagues, great colleague, powerful, dynamic, engaged woman, Givanni Tahari, who I've worked with in many different ways, and who's very supportive of the archive. She has been doing a lot of work around this through DocsBox, the organization that she's heading, and they've come up with a manifesto on restitution for around the moving image. But of course, the moving image is a slightly different one. The whole idea of it is to do with similar aspects. Access is one big thing, and access is a major element of the whole restitution issue. That's why ideas about the roles of museums and how those might change, and the roles of archives and why they might change or should change are also quite important. But in terms of the moving image, its access means so many different things, can mean so many different things. It's because it links right back to ownership very clearly. Who owns it? Who has the rights to keep it and who has then the rights to access it? And there have been big issues because a lot of the production in early African cinema and even throughout the years has been done with European sources and resources and producers. And so a lot of them end up in European institutions. And the filmmakers, well, I say European institutions, sometimes South African institutions as well, have acquired the work of African filmmakers. And when they need to use their own work, they have to pay those institutions a significant amount of money just to access it. That is one thing. And also any younger filmmakers who might want to see and want to have some sort of access to it, even to view it, not just to requirement to use any of it, but just to view it. That becomes something quite inaccessible, and that is where the access issue becomes quite significant around restitution. It's to do with who has it, how they use it, the people that claim the rights now, how they use the work, and how those who actually produced it originally and those who would like to use it now can access it. So it's a big question. It's not the only one.
No, I mean, do you want to talk a little bit what the other ones are? I mean, it's a huge topic and we could be here a while. Because if we're talking about restitution and ownership and permission, because I think you can't talk about restitution without talking about permission. And normally I think it's what you call it? It's the wrong way around. As someone who made a film or who shot something for an international organization, I have authorship of it, but I don't have ownership. Therefore, that means that whoever owns it gets to determine how it's used, not the person who made it. So my perception belongs to someone else. And I think that has been the problem across the board has been the problem across the board for all art that we've lost, or even that we now make, because it's being influenced by who brings the resources.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's also can be quite limited in how it's used or presented or even valued in its position in someone else's ownership. It's not. I mean, that's definitely true of the African artifacts, where people have no idea what the significance of it is in terms of its heritage and its culture. But at the same time, those people who could use it or who could have a perspective, a more informed perspective on its role and on its history and its culture, and who can inspire new generations. That is the saddest thing. Is that those on the African continent who are coming through, they have no access to that part of their archive. And it's true to some extent as well for the moving image, I think. And so it's I think
it's absolutely true.
Yeah.
It is, because, and just to go back to You Hide Me, which again I will plug, is required viewing for everybody. When I watched that, it's like, but I asked this question, I mean, the moment I understood anything about art and wondering, when I was questioning, when I was trying to form myself, when I was asking those questions, I was wondering about these things. And there's something very comforting to know that the question has been asked before. Also comforting, but also infuriating, because if I'd known that this was a question that had been asked before I was even born, then maybe I would be further along. It wouldn't feel like I'm starting again.
Yes.
Or that I have to start again. And that severing of communication, of idea, is the huge problem. Even with how we look at ourselves. Because with that severing and with the ownership being external, then frames skews those two things.
Yes. But I think
which is why I'm so excited that your thing exists.
But
so
I mean,
you're here, June. Really,
the same issues though exist for the physical archives and artifacts that should be made available on the African continent. With the same issues exist to some extent with the moving, because you need to have resources, you need to have buildings, you need to have commitments on the African continent to actually value this and to receive it and to help to make it accessible. It's access is one thing in terms of getting it from where it is, but also ensuring that there is going to be, that it's valued where it's going to, and I think it would be, and that is I think it's very evident that it would be
definitely
valued.
Would be.
People want to use it, but governments and organizations within the African continent as well to value it and to ensure that they do what they can to make the requests significant and to set up the partnerships within the nations and between nations as well to make this happen, because the access to the technology, access to the storage, all of that is challenging for the African continent. But
it's
at
true.
At the same time, collective approaches might be the way to make some of this happen. and
Yeah.
because I mean, obviously the continent is still producing quite a lot. And I think one of the things that I did say as well at the end of the session on Tuesday, the webinar session, was that a lot of young people aren't waiting for that to happen, and they're not waiting for the partners and the partnerships on other continents to make their connections happen. And I did mention the Nest Collective. I mentioned Cinidb, and I also mentioned an initiative that Gayleen Gould, who was head of cinemas and events, and the person that we started the Black Film Bulletin together, the magazine Black Film Bulletin, when we were at the BFI, and she started this project that was linking, that was actually picking up on links that a lot of young creatives were making across continents. It was called No Direct Flight because, of course, as everyone knows, you've got to go from one part of Africa to the next. Very often you have to go via Europe or elsewhere. But it was called No Direct Flight because what it meant was they were bypassing all of the existing structures and finding their own models for connecting, for sharing information, for working together. And I think this was the other thing that came out of that whole discussion, is that you need to find new models that fit, that gives you a starting point or gives you an advantage from where you are. Streaming platforms and those things, they will come to you once they see that you are the place to be. And I think sometimes people maybe get it the wrong way around. Obviously, it's good to go where there are some resources, but at the same time,
you have to make
those
your own.
who are ready to make their own, in the longer term, they're going to be the ones that are in the powerful position because people will be obliged to come to them. And I think in terms of institutions who can support those sort of initiatives are the ones that are going to be the most strategically helpful, because I think and obviously there needs to be a link between what the newer projects are doing and resources like this archive and other archives, because
absolutely
that will also serve both.
Us
working with them will help to keep the relevance of our archive, and it can also serve them as a living archive. So I think that's some of the way to look at that.
Okay, we have a question. A couple, actually. Revisiting a history that you were very much a part of, June, have you made discoveries that have surprised you? New things or something you thought you knew, but now look at and understand in a new way?
Ooh, let me think. Discoveries. Yeah, I think some of the discoveries have been not only around African cinema, but also, I think, I'm not going to speak generally, but discoveries even within the archive and also between how some of the people that I thought I knew and filmmakers that I thought I knew, when you look at exactly how they were working and what else they were doing, and that because you were moving so fast in doing contemporary curation, it's only when you get to the point of setting up an archive and start to going back through even what they did before, that you can, or what they might have given you that you haven't actually had the possibility to use in any way, that you discover so much more. And in that context, I think of the
Mhm.
work of Lloyd Record, one of the first Black filmmakers to make films here in the UK, in London, before Horace Ove, before Lionel Ngakane, you know, this Jamaican actor and filmmaker, and his short films. And I have in the archive, it's something he would have given me. Unfortunately, he died a few years ago, a script based on another Caribbean short story, but set in London. And it was when I was working with a group of students from Central St. Martin's that, and who wanted to look at the script. Of course, that's the other thing. We do have scripts and transcripts. And I should just track back a little bit and tell you about that. And the reason we have them is because it was the pre-digital era. And because I was working between festivals that were different language festivals. I speak French, so I work with Image Caribe in Martinique and with other festivals. And because the materials were often, this is another question of access, were often not subtitled for other territories. So not only would I have to resource and find the film and everything about it, but also the script or transcript, because at that time the festival was using like an electronic subtitling system where they project the subtitles along the bottom of the projected film. So it's 16 or 35 mil film being projected, and then they would project, translate the transcript or the script and project the dialogue underneath it. So that's why we have scripts and transcripts in the archive. One of the reasons. The other reason is that I worked a lot as a curator. You work a lot between the industry, producers, people who are interested in what is who the talent is and where they are, and the filmmakers. And the filmmakers know that, so they give you short scripts and so. And so I have worked in helping to make films like Jibril Diop Mambiti's Hyenas, a link between him and Channel 4. So we have the Hyena script in, and diet and correspondence and everything for the making of that film. But the idea is that this stuff is there, and when you look at things that some of the filmmakers were not able to make, it expands the information that you have and the understanding you have about that person and about the time that they were working in, because that is a short dramatic film, and he was so good in what he did. That should have been made. And when Sarah Maldor had given me a script that she never did make, in fact, I have, and I've spoken to her daughter about it. It's in the archive, and the thing is, when you discover, even within what you have, things that then put the person or the time, the era, into a different way. It's just further information. These are discoveries that help to shape what you knew or what you thought you knew about a particular time or even a particular filmmaker. So there's some of the discoveries I would talk about. To think about discoveries about archiving is something wider.
Team of want to be archivists who you can train, because that's a lot of information, a lot of knowledge that you need to share so that it lives on. I have another question about what it is, because it lives beyond you and how you see what your hopes are for that. But before I do that, and we only have under 5 minutes left. There's a question about your thoughts about changing the role of archive, and also from me, working with archive. So you
I
first.
think changing the role of
archive. Yeah.
Archives. Changing the role of archives. I don't know. Well, I think.
Yeah, the changing role.
The changing role of archives. Well, the thing is, I think archives had become and have become over the years resources for creation. I mean, at one time they were resources for reference and information, but a lot of artists and a lot of new creators are using them as resources for creation, to make new work and to redefine the work that has gone before. But I think archives as living archives, they need to be involved and should be involved in all of the current debates and discussions around culture, around the development of art, around society. They need to be used by everybody. And I think that they need to be valued much more, because I think people think of archives as old and dusty and of the past. We're missing so much. Archives need to be valued. That's the main thing. And they need to also be, and as such, they need to be working in the context of other developments. I think they need to be some key strategic partnerships with archives. They should not be sidelined, or they should not sideline themselves. They need to be working with everything that is to do with looking to the future, because that is their key.
I do agree with you in that, like, I mean, as a filmmaker, archive to me is the beginning. And the beginning is a question of context. So how I come to it is really dependent on, it's the kernel that I bring myself to, and where I am and what I'm thinking, and where the archive is. When that meets, it creates something. And when I change, how I look at that changes, even though the thing itself, the script, the film, the art piece, because my knowledge of who I am develops, so does my relationship with that. So for me, but this is why I keep hopping on about access and I'm wanting to touch things or seeing things for myself, because there's so much information that's lost in the discrepancy that comes with digitization of something that was not originally digital. And how rich that is. And it becomes richer the more I allow myself to look at it as a consumer and not as something that I have to put on a pedestal. Because also I think the problem with archive is that it has been, it's not just age, it's also inaccessibility because of its reverence.
Yes. Yeah.
And the thing is to bring it over here in my lap to look at and be able to touch and interact with, that then allows you to just engage with the wonder of what was and potentially what could be, because you're both here. And when I say both, I mean what was and what is with me and what I want.
Right. Yes. I think definitely that all of what,
and that's how I come at it as a storyteller.
Yes. But the thing is, this is it. I think that it's what people understood archives to be, or what they think archives are, is quite constraining and narrow. And I think once people are aware of what it can be and how it can be used. That is what is important to take forward. And I think it's it's changed so significantly, and it will continue to change, because the thing is, in the same way that this particular film, even the subjects of the films, of the moving image films, can be used in different ways. I mean, this is not the only sort of initiative that we've done around some of the work in the archive, and this happens to be a campaign that was bubbling underneath. And when Kwata and I spoke about doing this for a year ago, for doing it this year, it wasn't at the level, the debate wasn't at the level that it is this year, then followed by, the Black Lives Matter and George Floyd and other things. Things change, and you cannot predict where the elements of the archive that are of value, where they are going to be of value in the future. And that is one of the things that was a big thing that I discovered and I realized. And that is why very often we are often in a position to provide quite interesting perspectives on things that are happening and that are coming now, anniversaries that happen. But in terms of what you as a creator can do is what excites me. That is the discovery that I think is one of the most significant. It's how artists and young filmmakers and students and other disciplines and other knowledge bases can use cinema. I mean, people contacted this, I think it was an Irish filmmaker who was making a film about moons, and they were they wanted aspects of from different films from around the world, scenes of moons or moonlight or scenes involving the moon. And they had been contacting a whole host of curators from around the world, and they contacted our archive. And we had to, myself and Nick, one of the our supporters and volunteers, went through a whole range of things. And so African moons and Caribbean moons are in that particular film. So it's creative ways of looking at it, but it's also ways in which the debate, the discussions, and also the demands for moving forward, the shape they've taken, where they've come, what that trajectory has been, are very, very important. And I think those need to be maintained.
No, I do agree. Unfortunately, I have to wrap up. I really don't want to, but closing remarks, we have 2 minutes. What do you want for it as it lives beyond you? What do you,
the archive.
What do you wish for it?
Yes, I would love it to have much wider access. I would love the filmmakers whose work is in it to be recognized, to be seen, for them to be able to definitely, take from the experience of the context in which their work has been seen or is in an archive like this, for them to also value that and to see how it could inform what it is they continue to do, and for other art forms also to engage with it. I think it's very important, and definitely to have it, as you started off by saying, available in all of these territories that are part of the whole Pan-African experience. That's what I would like for this particular archive, and for it to serve people's ambitions in the creative process.
Yeah, I want that too. And if I come up with any genius ideas, I will definitely let you know. June, thank you so much for your efforts and for your passion and for this archive. And Cinidb for this conversation.
Thank you very much for your interest. And for CDB
no,
also.
This has been really wonderful. Thank you. And I hope that this is the beginning of, of more access and interaction.
Indeed.
Goodbye, everybody. And thank you so much for your time.
Cinidb.